There you go. You can see it right there before your very eyes. In spite of, maybe because of, my world-renowned, extremely cheap camera. Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut 06470. That's my mailing address. That is the direct line from you to me, Malcolm Tent, your host, every single week, Lord willing and the creeks don't rise, of Tent Talks Tunes. Yes. Approximately 60 minutes every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, in which I sit down here in the lap of luxury at TPOS Studios in beautiful Connecticut and talk to you, the public, live about music and records and things relating to music and records. It's an awful lot of fun. It's about the most fun that a person can have in the middle of the day, indoors, during broad daylight. It's all right. It's all right. In case you're not able to watch live on the dreaded Facebook, Tent Talks Tunes is archived on my YouTube channel. Just look me up, baby. Look me up on the YouTube and subscribe, and you will never miss one single syllable of my precious utterances about that music stuff. Facebook, YouTube, video cameras. I'm a master of media. I love it. I love it. I see Derek is tuned in. Hello, Derek. My fellow bass man. Always good to have you here live on Tent Talks Tunes. Let's see, what's on the bulletin board today? Well, obviously we got to go through the mail, this week's mail. This is the single most eclectic bunch of mail I've ever gotten. Even more so than your average album by the Armed Delight Rifles. And that's pretty eclectic, let me tell you. The contents of this envelope from two different people defines eclecticism. Let's see what we got here, Well, imagine that. First, we've got a CD. CDs. We like CDs. Oh, by the way, hello, Pear in Sweden. Hello, Chad. And I can't really see who else is there, but I know you're there. Hi, guys. We got an awesome CD. I haven't heard it yet, but with a name like Junkie Vomit and the fact that it's an unreleased LP, you know I'm hooked. I'm hooked, I'm lined, I'm sinkered. A band name like that and the fact that it is an unreleased LP, boy, just cast out that line and reel me in, baby. I am helpless before something like that. That's from my good pal Mark Beef out in Tucson, Arizona. Beef, lead singer of the Pop Gestapo, lead singer of the Erudites, and an all-around good guy. The first time I ever toured the Southwest was with the Erudites, and Mark was in the van, and we had a real good time. We played San Diego, we played San Pedro at a bar where Henry Bukowski used to drink. Went all back and forth across the Tucson, Arizona desert. It was really cool. We also played Nogales, Mexico, which is one of my very favorite stops. The most I ever got paid in cash playing in Nogales, Mexico was 30 pesos. And when I got that 30 pesos at the end of the night, I thought, wow, 30 pesos, cool. I'm going to go on a little shopping spree here in Nogales. Until I did a little bit of quick calculating and I realized that 30 pesos is about the equivalent of $1.80. All right, so I made $1.80 once playing in Nogales. I love Nogales. I love the people there. The first time I ever played there, my pay was some food. I got fed in Nogales the first time, and what I got was a concoction of tortilla chips, roasted peanuts, and a hot sauce called salsa brita. And it was good. Oh my God, it was good. So simple and so effective. It was really good. And I think Mark must have heard me ranting and raving about the salsa brita because he also sent me a bottle of hot sauce. Authentic Mexican hot sauce from Mexico. It's even got the gringo label on the back with all of our nutritional information on it. Haven't tried it yet. The salsa huicol negra. Ooh boy. Hope it's not too hot, but I'm going to find out. I'm going to make my own plate tonight of tortillas, roasted peanuts, and salsa huicol. So thank you, Mark, for sending this to me. I've got a CD I'm going to send you in reciprocation. So muchas, muchas. Also from the great Southwest, my main dog, Jason Romo, who taught me the meaning of purple drank. If you don't know what purple drank is, look it up. Guarantee you I'm never going to drink the stuff, but it's an interesting concept. Jason Romo sent me some really weird stuff. We got an expired lottery ticket. I guess I'm the lucky dog, even though I didn't earn my $2 on this. I don't know what's up with that. A state of Texas branding iron, which I'm going to use on my enemies at some point. If anybody out there is a sinner or a lagger or a ligger or a layabout or just general no good and you need a brand, the brand of Texas will be put upon ye as a matter of discipline, thanks to Jason. And of course another random kiss trading card. I love them random kiss trading cards. And this is even, he must have mailed this even before my big interview with Bob Lewis of Devo, which, by the way, if you haven't caught them, I've done 4 interviews now so far with founding Devo member Bob Lewis. He's got some great stories to tell about the very early days of Devo. Of course, on my YouTube channel. But anyway, as a little bit of a show and tell on the last interview, I showed a wacky package. And I guess Jason can see in the future because he sent me a wacky package. The famous Gadzuka bubblegum wacky pack. Annoy your teacher, chew bubblegum in class. Very relevant to me because when I was in the 3rd grade and 4th grade, I had my wacky package collection confiscated twice by Mrs. Coven. First time, she gave it back. Second time, she kept it. Mrs. Coven, if you're out there, it'd be very nice if you sent me back my wacky package collection. I know it's been the better part of 50 years, but Malcolm Tent has got a long memory. He remembers how good his wacky package collection was at the time. He'd like it back. So thank you, Jason. Oh, I forgot. Chi-Chi's Golf Secrets. Yes, that's that's an obscure Devo reference if ever there was one. But an entire book about Chi-Chi's Golf Secret, which I'll be studying very carefully, just on the off chance that I ever do play golf. So there you go, kids. Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. Send me some stuff, and I'm happy to send you some stuff back. If you're in a band and you send me a record, I'll be delighted, if I like it, to play it on my radio show once I finally do get back on the air, when something resembling a new, or I should say old normal, is back in place. And I don't guarantee airplay on everything that everybody sends me, but I do promise you I will listen to it. And if I think it's going to work on my show, I'll play it. That's the Tent guarantee. All right, everybody. Enough of the bulletin board. Let's get down to brass tacks, shall we? As promised, I've got a big old stack of records right here. Records made by famous people before they were famous. And this is a long, long, deep, labyrinthine topic. There are so many of them. As AC/DC once sang, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. It ain't no fun waiting around to be a millionaire, but you got to start somewhere. You got to start plowing the field. You got to hoe your row. You got to start writing songs, and you got to start making records. And these are some of the very first records from some of the people who made lots of records later. Now, did I mention AC/DC? I guess I just did, didn't I? Ha ha ha. What a tease. As everybody knows, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you now, one of my great joys in life is digging deep through the bins at record stores and through the boxes at the record swap meets and going to the flea markets and thrift shops and just digging. And as is always the case, you got to go through about 1,000,000 frogs to find the fairy princess. You kiss a lot of frogs before you finally kiss the one that turns into a fairy princess. So amidst all of the, oh, I've got some AV for you right here. Check this out. Amidst all of these, all of the Herb Alpert records, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Whipped Cream and Other Delights, amongst the thousands and hundreds and millions and dozens of millions and tens of thousands and hundreds of dozens of Whipped Cream and Other Delights records that you're going to find in the thrift shops, in the dollar bins, you occasionally find something good. If you want to know why I have all of those Whipped Cream and Other Delights, I'll tell you about it someday. There is a reason. There is a reason. So there you are. You're slogging through all the copies of Whipped Cream and Other Delights, and The First Family Rides Again, and John F. Kennedy Memorial Speeches from 1963, and something will pop out at you every now and again. And in this case, it was this really weird-looking record called by the Valentines. Looks interesting, kind of a 60s thing going on. It's on a label I'd never heard of. And I always pick up stuff like this. If it just looks interesting, I'll grab it. And so there is actually a blurb on the front cover under my hand, and I'm not going to reveal the surprise because it's not always that easy. You don't always have a blurb explaining what it is. A lot of times you got to go on the back and start reading. You got to read the liner notes. Lots of liner notes. You got to read the songwriter credits. There's songs on here by Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane. Okay, Vanda and Young. All right, that's interesting. Don Covey, Phil Spector. Okay, I don't know who these guys are. Somebody named Young, published by J. Albert. That implies an AC/DC connection. And wouldn't you know it, even without the blurb on the front, which I'm still going to cover up, if you study the band photo carefully enough, and you look hard enough, and you know your AC/DC history enough, you might recognize one of the young fellows in the respectable suit. Which one might it be? Who might it be? Let's see if anybody's got a guess. Michael, you got a guess? Dan? Hey, any guesses from Dan or Dorian? John Mahoney? What do you think? Murray? Scott Monroe? Who's going to guess? Oh, somebody guessed Angus. Well, I'm going to give it away. I'm going to big reveal, do the big reveal on the blurb as to who is on this record. Are you ready? Bon Scott. There he is, Bon Scott, at the tender young age of, I don't know, he looks pretty old there, but he was apparently very young, because this record's from 1966. Young Bon Scott, singing some very kind of bog standard 60s garage stuff. To know you is to love you, aka to know him is to love him or her or whatever. Every day I have to cry. I can hear the raindrops, Sookie Sookie, and a couple of originals. Apparently the Valentines had a couple of chart records in 1966 in Perth, Australia. They did not chart anywhere else in Australia, and their records were apparently not released anywhere else on the planet except Perth. So it's just really amazing that you could finally, that one could just dig something like this up completely random. I mean, it's a later reissue, obviously, but even this reissue is pretty darn obscure. And yeah, it's not great, but it's interesting. It's Bon Scott. And what's really cool about Bon Scott, after he did this sort of 60s garage teeny bop stuff, he joined a group called Fraternity. And Fraternity were hippies. They were a total hippie band. Somewhere deep in my archive, I've got a VHS tape featuring a clip of Fraternity, featuring Bon Scott with a long beard and like a lumberjack shirt and bell bottoms and playing a flute. It certainly is a long way to the top from the Valentines to Fraternity to AC/DC. I'm sure that clip by Fraternity, it's got to be on YouTube. While you're on YouTube subscribing to my channel, look up Fraternity Bon Scott and see what you find. And if anybody finds the link, feel free to post it. It's interesting. Interesting how the hippies bred so much hard rock. Here's another case of a record that just looks interesting. I found this in a big old collection I bought off a dude. Excuse me while I hydrate. A dude who used to work for the big Connecticut rock station. And when I say rock, I mean rock. I-95. Which, as far as I know, is still on air broadcasting a bunch of worthless, dull, mediocre tripe like they always have. But I guess in the 70s and maybe in the 60s, when I-95 would get promo albums, they would actually save them for a while before they summarily threw them away. They actually had a record library, apparently. And this guy worked at I-95, and when the records were rotated out, aka tossed in the dumpster, he'd take them home. So, a bunch of years back, I bought this guy's entire collection. The good, the bad, the ugly. And speaking of the good, the bad, and the ugly, Dan has just posted the YouTube clip of Fraternity featuring a bearded, bell-bottomed Bon Scott playing a flute. So when I'm done talking, look it up. Anyway, I bought this giant collection, and as usual, I had to throw a lot of stuff away because it was really terrible. But there were a bunch of interesting records, including one I'd kind of heard of before, but never heard, a band called Jordy, an album called Hope You Like It. And I knew a little bit about Jordy. I'd never heard him before. Now, all of you rock and roll fanatics out there, and all you AC/DC people, do you recognize anybody on this album cover who later ended up in AC/DC? Honest to God, I'm not even sure. I think it's that dude right there. I'm pretty sure that's Brian Johnson of AC/DC. Pretty sure. With a lot more hair than he's got now. You look on the back, they basically look completely different, but I'm pretty sure that's Brian Johnson as well. So Brian Johnson's first album from 1973 with an album by Jordy. And I'm going to lay it on the line right now, kids. You know I'm well renowned for my blunt honesty. Malcolm Tent calls it the way he sees it. I tell it like I think it is. You can agree, you can disagree. That's what the internet is for, right? Endless arguing over trivial bullshit. I'm going to tell it like it is. I don't like AC/DC. I mean, they're okay. If somebody's playing AC/DC, I don't, start foaming at the mouth and fly into a mad rage and demand that it be taken off. But I don't have a single AC/DC record in my collection. I never listen to AC/DC. Really don't care about them one way or another. But I do like my rock and roll history, and I'm very, very interested in these deep backstories of certain bands and certain members. So, all right, man, I don't really care about AC/DC too much, but let's see what Jordy is made of. Guess what? It's great. It's an awesome record. It's real heavy British style boogie, rock and roll. You could even call it proto-metal if you want. And surprise, surprise, surprise. If all you've ever heard is Brian Johnson's excruciating shrieking in AC/DC, you'd never guess the guy can actually sing. He can actually sing. He actually does have a range other than the absolute limits of the top. He can actually, if he feels like it, sing in a way that does not sound like he's shredding his larynx with a cheese grater. He can sing. Who would have thought? And the songs are good. They're really good. Like, serious. I have not heard their other albums, but this one made me really like them. So Brian Johnson, Who would have guessed in the early days? Dude could sing. Pretty cool stuff. Jordy. I'm going to look them up. And by the way, if anybody is better at face recognition than I am, is that actually him? Is that Brian Johnson? Somebody please let me know. Let me know. And somebody just commented that he had to sing a lot like Bon Scott. What's interesting is when you listen to that Jordy record, you can actually hear a bit of a similarity. It's not quite carbon copy, but there are definite Bon Scott inflections in the way that he sings for Jordy. Not what he ever did with AC/DC, but it's kind of there. It's part of his greatly constricted range. It's like he had a range like this in Jordy, and then for AC/DC, he had a range about like, I don't know if I can get my hands close enough to show you just how narrow that range is, but yeah, they really tightened him up. And apparently, yes. Dan from the Internet Research Team says that is indeed Brian Johnson. Thank you, Dan, for the knowledge. Let's talk about some other humble beginnings of rockers. We've talked a little bit about hard rock and heavy metal. Let's talk about punk for a second. Punk rock, baby. That's what flows through my veins, my plastic veins. If rock and roll grows out of my follicles, then punk rock runs through my veins. And this is a record that I found. I've told stories in the past about liquidating the great Brass City records. Excuse me, folks. Lots of pollen in the air. It's either dry, humid Connecticut air or it's pollen. It's something, baby. I love Connecticut, but whew, the atmosphere around here puts one's trachea to the test. So I was liquidating the collection of Brass City records a bunch of years ago and saved a lot of things from going into a dumpster. And one of the records that did not end up in a dumpster was this. Same deal, like I didn't know what it was at first glance, because as you can tell by the omnipresence of my dollar store cheaters, I got to put these things on to read. But my eyes are good enough to spot an interesting looking record. I don't care if it's across the room. If it's interesting, I'll find it. So I saw this record, 45. It was a label name I'd never seen before. Fort Records, I guess. Forte. Completely generic. You know, no real art to it. Generic typeface. It's a cover of Mona by Bo Diddley, and it's by, whoa, the Iguanas. Well, well, well. If y'all know your rock and roll history, you might know that the Iguanas, who did this really okay version of Mona by Bo Diddley on the A side, and this really okay song called I Don't Know Why on the B. The Iguanas were from Michigan, and they had a drummer named Jim Osterberg. Jim Osterberg later became the lead singer of a group called, you guessed it, the Stooges, under the name Iggy Pop. Well, I'll be tarred and feathered. I found a copy of Iggy's first ever record when he was just playing the drums. Not even playing the drums so much as shaking maracas. There's more maracas on this record than there are drums. And, you know, it's okay. It's nothing great. It's not like a top shelf garage barn burner. It's okay. It probably got some, you know, turntable action at some frat houses or something, but it's just interesting, you know, that that's where it all began. This one humble little 45. I love this kind of stuff. There's another garage band, and I don't have an original one of these. I wish I did. Well, no, we'll get to that one in a minute. We're going to stay with the punk motif. I've talked about both of these records in past episodes of Tent, Talks, Tunes. I talked about this record in an episode I did on cheap, cheesy, sleazy cash-in records. This one right here. As you can see, it's Punk Rock by the Vacants, released on some generic no-name label that only put out records for consumption at dime stores, dollar bins, truck stops, what have you. So if you look at my episode about cheesy, sleazy punk rock records, you'll see the Vacants mentioned. I've done other episodes on outsider musicians, musicians who totally just go their own way, do whatever they want, damn the consequences. And I talked a lot about this guy here, Ron Warren Ganderton, and his project called Guitar Star. This is the kind of stuff that I love. You got to hear it to believe it. So I've talked about both of these records, but not in this particular context. What does a cheap, sleazy, cheesy punk rock cash-in record have to do with one of the great perennial original outsider musicians? What do these two things got to do with each other? What's the similarity? What's the common bond? Well, as you know, a band is only as good as its drummer. And I didn't know who the drummer was on this record because there's no credits, obviously, because it's just a cheapo cash-in record. I mean, these guys are supposed to be punk rock, right? Look at that. I guess they look angry, and they're posing in, I guess, a back alley. I guess. But it wasn't until I did a little bit of research that I said, oh yeah, that guy right there. If you look carefully enough and you think a little bit about more like British New Wave, I guess, and drummers, then you would not have to look at the Ron Warren Ganderton album and read the credits. You wouldn't have to do that because you'd recognize this guy. But I'm going to read the credits for you. Or maybe I'll show you the credits because that's more dramatic. A lot more dramatic. Let's go for drama, shall we? The dramatic unveiling of the name of the drummer. Scott Monroe, you're right. All you people out there watching live, don't read his comment. Because here we go on the Ron Warren Ganderton record. We've, of course, got Ron Warren Ganderton on guitar, Bobby Ward on drums. Ah, there he is. Martin Chambers on the drums. Yes, indeedy. Martin Chambers. Pretty cool, huh? And that's Martin Chambers just judging by his presence on such two disparate products, which both came out of the same time and same era. England, during the summer of 77-ish. That's where this record was made as well. I'm going to guess that Martin Chambers was just one of those many, many, many people who was on the scene, just sort of slumming around from this band to that, picking up a gig wherever he could, and just ended up playing on these records before he finally hit the jackpot by joining the Pretenders. Now this record, I'm not going to belabor it too much. This record's actually really good. The Vacants really were a band, and it was just by pure circumstance that they ended up having their album released as a sleazy, cheesy punk rock cash-in. So do some research on this one. If you like punk rock, you probably like this one. And Ron Warren Ganderton, once again, I'm not going to belabor it. You really gotta hear it to believe it. But these are just the types of gigs that Martin Chambers was picking up before he became a Pretender. Fascinating stuff. I love these kinds of things. This is real history. This is real, tangible history. You can hold it in your hands, kids. Hold it in your hands. I'm holding in my hand right now something I want to tell you about. I'm very proud of the fact that Tent Talks Tunes is sponsor-free. You're not going to look at my Tent Talks Tunes episodes here or on YouTube without seeing a commercial for some stupid, worthless product that means nothing to you at all and is irrelevant to your life. Ain't going to happen. Not if I can help it. But you are going to have to sit through a brief commercial for one of my products, because as I said before, I only endorse products that I believe in. You know I believe in myself. I'm like Kiss, baby, from the immortal album, The Elder. Music from The Elder. I believe in me. And I believe in telling you about a record I've got coming out on my label TPOS. TPOS, baby. Don't weep. Read it on Discogs and eBay. I am reissuing a 7-inch 45 by a band from New Hampshire in 1977 called Malpractice. 1977. You'd think, oh, summer 77, New Hampshire punk? Nope. The last vestiges of New Hampshire rock music, independent rock music from New Hampshire in the 70s. How does that tie into what I'm talking about? I told you guys I'm not going to give you an irrelevant, stupid commercial. My commercials are relevant and intelligent and very much in relationship to what I'm talking about today on Tent Talks Tunes. Malpractice, New Hampshire rock music from 1977, featured two guys. You can see them right there in the middle, the bass player and the drummer. Don't recognize them? Well, I'm going to help you out. The bass player, there he is, his name is Merle Allen. The drummer is his band, the drummer is his brother, who at the time was known as Kevin, but is soon to be known as Gigi. Gigi Allen on the drums, Merle Allen on the bass, with Jeff Penny on guitar, and Brian Demers on guitar. This is 1977 New Hampshire rock and roll, featuring the Allen brothers, before Gigi Allen was Gigi Allen, and before Merle Allen was a murder junkie. So this is going to be out soon. I just sent the actual cover art to the pressing plant last night. This is the advanced test pressing version. I made 25 of them. I got a few left. They're measly $20 each plus shipping. If you want one, contact me directly, because once they're gone, they're going to be gone. And I think I've got about 5, maybe 6 left. So if you want one, and you're an Uber collector, let me know. I will hook you up. That's my job, baby. My job is to hook you up. Oh boy, we're getting deep into the roll now. Woo! All right, I'm going to give up a secret here. Maybe some people know about it already, because as we all know, in the internet, there are no secrets. And I've already got these records anyway, so I really don't care. My love of dollar bins. My love of the dollar bins. You will find the dollar bins stuffed with, and I'm going to use this term again, sleazy, cheesy cash-in records, exploitation records, and I've talked about them a lot. One of the premier cash-in labels, actually there's a few of them from the early 60s. There's a bunch of them. There's one called Design Records. They would sell their albums for like, 39 cents when a regular album went for $1.88. Another very famous and very cheap-ass exploitation label from the early 60s. Hey, look at that. It's Design again, but with a different logo. Hey, I'm learning something right now, man. Design and Design. Both of which were subsidiaries of Pickwick from Long Island. God damn, this one's on Design too. Well, I guess it kind of makes sense, since these things have one thing in common besides all being on Design. Well, look at that. See, this is totally perfect because this one doesn't even say Design on it. But there you go, the swinging teen sounds of Ronnie Dove and Terry Phillips. So, how do these cheesy exploitation labels work? I guess Ronnie Dove, who I've hardly ever heard of at all, I guess Ronnie Dove had a hit single or something. He might have had a top 100 single. So what these labels like Design and Pickwick and Coronet and Crown and gee whiz, I don't know the names of all of them, but what they would do is read the trade magazines and say, okay, Ronnie Dove, he's got a number 98 single right now. He's 98 with a bullet. What do we have by Ronnie Dove? What can we license by Ronnie Dove? He must have recorded something we can get cheap. So they'll license some early recordings by Ronnie Dove. In this case, I think two songs by Ronnie Dove. And they'll put them on a full-length LP featuring the 2 songs by Ronnie Dove, and then 10 songs by Terry Phillips. Terry Phillips. Who's Terry Phillips? Well, keep thinking. Put this in your memory, kids. Terry Phillips. What's Terry Phillips got to do with what I'm talking about here? Well, if you look at the web of interconnections, you'll see that Terry Phillips was a staff singer-songwriter for Pickwick Records, the home of design. And he appeared on a lot of stuff. And they were all cheap cash-in records. Like, this is a great example of the cheap sort of cash-in records that Terry Phillips made his living off of. This is Soundsville. The sounds of New York, the sounds of England, the sounds of surfing, the sounds of West Coast, the sounds of Nashville, the sounds of motorcycle. And these are all, like, they have nothing to do with motorcycle, except the sounds of motorcycle are some tired, old surf instrumentals that this label cranked out one afternoon with the sounds of revving motorcycles overdubbed on top of them. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. And Terry Phillips was about eyeball deep in this racket. Besides licensing the 2 tracks by Ronnie Dove that they could get on the cheap, he was a guy who was in charge of cranking out the filler material on these albums. Yes, filler. Lots of filler. Cy Mann was another guy who did nothing but filler for labels like Pickwick. And one dude who was also involved in that racket, cranking out the filler all day and all night, was a guy whose voice you can hear if you listen carefully enough. And if you listen even more carefully, you can hear his guitar playing, his distinctive style of lead guitar playing. He's on all of these records. The Surfsiders sing the Beach Boys songbook, featuring the worst vocal harmonies you'll ever hear, and the cheapest, most rinky-dink musical accompaniment you could hope for. I always loved this record because it's one of those records that's just so bad, so god-awful that you gotta love it. This was even before I knew who was on it. Story gets more interesting, doesn't it? Kind of the same deal with the Ronnie Dove and Terry Phillips. I mean, the Ronnie Dove tracks are, of course, completely anonymous and disposable, but the Terry Phillips tunes have this kind of ramshackle, fun, ridiculous quality to them. And I always liked them, and guess what? This guy's on this album, too. Cruz, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. He's on this album. He's on one of these songs, and you can hear his voice very clearly. Very clearly. Which song is he on? The Sounds of the Campus? No. The Sounds of Detroit? No. The Sounds of Chicago? No. God damn. The Sounds of Philadelphia? No. Ah, he's on one of the Sounds of the Motorcycle. Lead vocals and guitar. Same song that's on this album here, Out of Sight, featuring a couple of people you've actually heard of, like Lou Rawls and Paul Revere, and a whole bunch of filler. The Beach Nuts, Cycle Annie. That's him, singing lead. Who am I talking about? Who am I talking about? What artist is this in the year 1964, 65, who was locked in some dank basement in Long Island with the mandate to crank out as many cheap Beach Boys sound-alike records as possible with as little money as possible, as quickly as possible? Who was it? Who was chained to the wall in Long Island City with the orders to record 3 albums of hot rod music in one day? Just do it quick, fast. We got to get this on the market next week. Who was it? Who was the lead singer on Cycle Annie by the Beach Nuts? Who was it lurking down there by that girl's foot? Who was it? I don't know if I'm going to tell you. I'm going to leave it up to you, the internet research team, because once again, we know that it's posted somewhere. It's posted somewhere on YouTube. If you look up the Beach Nuts, Cycle Annie, try to do it without reading any descriptions or without any spoilers, and just listen to the song. And listen to the lead vocals and the rhythm guitar and everything, and you will know in about 2 seconds who it is. That's your homework. That's your fun homework assignment for tonight, courtesy of moi, here on Tent Talks Tunes. I love this stuff. Love it. Let's see. I got one more artiste I could talk about. Maybe two. I'll talk about one. Got to say something for further episodes, for the future. You know, you always got to put a little bit of information in the bank for later down the road. Unlike the Cycle Annie track by the Beach Nuts, I'm going to tell you full on right now who's on these records. And this is just a small little pinch of 45 RPM singles that I got here out of many that were by this guy. Most of these records here, these early 45s, and most of them on the Original Sound label. Grab one here and show you. There you go, Heavies by the Rotations on Original Sound Records from Cucamonga, California. Original Sound had a pretty fair number of hits. They were a big regional label. Did some pretty cool stuff, but also lots of, let's face it, cheap novelty records, silly novelty records, and sleazy cash-ins. Heavies by the Rotations might be one of them. What else we got here? This one's pretty cool. Grunion Run by the Persuaders, aka the Hollywood Persuaders. What else have we got here from Cucamonga, California on the Original Sound label? God, there's so many of them. I only grabbed a few. No cheating, by the way. Don't go looking it up until I deliver the punchline. Also on Original Sound, see, here's a group you all might have heard of if you like doo-wop, the Penguins. Memories of El Monte by the Penguins. The camera just came into focus. Can you see the songwriting credits? Who wrote Memories of El Monte by the Penguins? It was in focus. Let's see if we can get it back in focus. Maybe you can really squint hard and see that Memories of El Monte by the Penguins was written by... That ain't going to come back into focus. I'll tell you right now. That says Zappa and Collins. That's Frank Zappa and Ray Collins of the Mothers. And of course later Frank Zappa of Frank Zappa. So what's the deal with these? Why all these Original Sound 45s with Frank Zappa involvement? Well, Frank Zappa in the early 1960s, between 1961 and 1963, had his apprenticeship at a studio in Cucamonga, California that was run by a guy named Paul Buff. And Paul Buff basically taught Frank Zappa how to record, how to make records, how to run a studio, how to engineer. And Paul Buff cranked out a lot of stuff that ended up on the Original Sound label. So Frank Zappa, who was there all the time and ended up being part of Paul Buff's wrecking crew, so to speak, plays on tons of these records. And it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier with Cycle Annie by the Beach Nuts. You might not hear it at first, but if you listen carefully enough, and you know the works of Zappa, and you know what to listen for, you'll hear it. You'll hear his stuff all over these records, primarily in the guitar department. Excuse me, I believe he played drums on some of these. Excuse me, I'm not really sure, but definitely some guitar. No vocals that I know of, but definite Zappa guitar. And also the production on these things, especially the really silly novelty records, you will hear tons of production tricks and silly sound effects and studio flim-flammery that Zappa would use to great effect on his own records in later years. Fascinating stuff. Nobody knew who Frank Zappa was. He wasn't anybody. He was just some studio guy in Cucamonga working for Paul Buff, grinding out the novelty records. Like an idea with some of these heavies and the cruncher. This is like a Surf 45, as is Grunion Run and Tijuana Surf, just another one of 10 billion Surf 45s that they were cranking out back then. Memories of El Monte is an honest-to-God, pretty much straightforward doo-wop song, because we all know that Zappa loved doo-wop, and the Penguins, even if it only was Cleve Duncan and a bunch of other guys, were a serious, legit doo-wop band. So Zappa and Ray Collins wrote an almost straightforward doo-wop tearjerker for these guys. But Zappa being Zappa, he just couldn't leave well enough alone, and he slipped at least one completely ridiculous lyric into this record. And if you look up Memories of El Monte by the Penguins, you'll hear it. If I got the story correctly, when Zappa was in Cucamonga, he recorded a track that got licensed, oddly enough, to Capitol Records in 1963. And I'm pretty sure I'm right, because the B-side, called Not Another One, is credited to Frank Zappa. Nope. Paul Buff and some other guy. So Paul Buff wrote the B-side. Frank Zappa wrote the A-side. Released in November 1963, it's yet another surf cash-in, but it's also a novelty record. It's about John F. Kennedy as the big surfer. And it's Frank Zappa's first ever major label writing credit, appearance on a label anywhere. But of course, a record lampooning John F. Kennedy that was released in November of 1963 did not last on the market very long. It was pulled. We all know why. But this is where Frank Zappa got his start. Handfuls of humble novelty 45s. And you can trace a direct line between the work that he did on those and what he did later. Pretty cool. And that's why I love talking about and showing these humble origin records of people who later got to be very famous and world-changing. From such humble beginnings do we all come. I myself am going to go tidal off into the sunset. It is about sunset right now if you're watching live. Harry the cat, as usual, is sacked out on the sofa. Harry is not going to be jonesing, or I should say bogarting the camera. He apparently got into a fight with another feline the other day, and he's got a nasty puncture wound in his ear. So he's on antibiotics right now, and he's on the mend. He's sleeping peacefully. I'm sure he'll be hogging the camera again next week. We're patiently waiting. So that's Harry, that's me, and that's this week's episode of Tent Talks Tunes. I do hope to be back in about 167 hours' time. So until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.